Chapter 4 of The Iron Heel by Jack London. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Matt Saw. Slaves of the Machine. The more I thought of Jackson's arm, the more shaken I was. I was confronted by the concrete. For the first time I was seeing life. My university life and study and culture had not been real. I had learned nothing but theories of life and society that looked all very well on the printed page, but now I had seen life itself. Jackson's arm was a fact of life. The fact, man, the irrefragable fact of Ernest's was ringing in my consciousness. It seemed monstrous, impossible, that our whole society was based upon blood. And yet there was Jackson. I could not get away from him. Constantly my thoughts swung back to him as the compass to the pole. He had been monstrously treated. His blood had not been paid for in order that a larger dividend might be paid. And I knew a score of happy, complacent families that had received those dividends, and by that much had profited by Jackson's blood. If one man could be so monstrously treated and society move on its way unheeding, might not many men be so monstrously treated? I remembered Ernest's women of Chicago who toiled for 90 cents a week, and the child slaves of the southern cotton mills he had described. And I could see their wan white hands, from which the blood had been pressed, at work upon the cloth out of which had been made my gown. And then I thought of the Sierra Mills and the dividends that had been paid, and I saw the blood of Jackson upon my gown as well. Jackson I could not escape. Always my meditations led me back to him. Down in the depths of me I had a feeling that I stood on the edge of a precipice. It was as though I were about to see a new and awful revelation of life. And not I alone. My whole world was turning over. There was my father. I could see the effect Ernest was beginning to have on him. And then there was the bishop. When I had last seen him, he had looked a sick man. He was at high nervous tension, and in his eyes there was unspeakable horror. From the little I learned, I knew that Ernest had been keeping his promise of taking him through hell. But what scenes of hell the bishop's eyes had seen I knew not, for he seemed too stunned to speak about them. Once, the feeling strong upon me that my little world and all the world was turning over, I thought of Ernest as the cause of it. And also I thought, we were so happy and peaceful before he came. And the next moment, I was aware that the thought was a treason against truth, and Ernest rose before me transfigured, the apostle of truth, with shining brows and the fearlessness of one of God's own angels, battling for the truth and the right and battling for the succor of the poor and lonely and oppressed. And then there arose before me another figure, the Christ. He, too, had taken the part of the lowly and oppressed, and against all the established power of priest and Pharisee. And I remembered his end upon the cross, and my heart contracted with a pang as I thought of Ernest. Was he, too, destined for a cross? He, with his clarion call and war-noted voice, and all the fine man's vigor of him. And in that moment, I knew that I loved him, and that I was melting with desire to comfort him. I thought of his life, a sordid, harsh, and meager life it must have been. And I thought of his father, who had lied and stolen for him and been worked to death. And he himself had gone into the mills when he was 10. All my heart seemed bursting with desire to fold my arms around him and to rest his head on my breast, his head that must be weary with so many thoughts, and to give him rest, just rest, and easement and forgetfulness for a tender space. I met Colonel Ingram at a church reception. Him I knew well, and had known him well for many years. I trapped him behind large palms and rubber plants, though he did not know he was trapped. He met me with the conventional gaiety and gallantry. He was ever a graceful man, diplomatic, tactful, and considerate. And as for appearance, he was the most distinguished-looking man in our society. Beside him, even the venerable head of the university looked tawdry and small. And yet I found Colonel Ingram situated the same as the unlettered mechanics. He was not a free agent. He, too, was bound upon the wheel. I shall never forget the change in him when I mentioned Jackson's case. His smiling good nature vanished like a ghost. A sudden, frightful expression distorted his well-bred face. I felt the same alarm that I had felt when James Smith broke out. But Colonel Ingram did not curse. That was the slight difference that was left between the working man and him. He was framed as a wit, but he had no wit now, and unconsciously This way and that he glanced for avenues of escape, but he was trapped amid the palms and rubber trees. Oh, he was sick of the sound of Jackson's name. Why had I brought the matter up? He did not relish my joke. It was poor taste on my part and very inconsiderate. Did I not know that in his profession personal feelings did not count? He left his personal feelings at home when he went down to the office. At the office he had only professional feelings. "Should Jackson have received damages?" I asked. "Certainly," he answered. "That is, personally, I have a feeling that he should. But that has nothing to do with the legal aspects of the case." He was getting his scattered wits slightly in hand. "Tell me, has right anything to do with the law?" I asked. "You have used the wrong initial consonant," he smiled in answer. "Might?" I queried, and he nodded his head. "And yet we are supposed to get justice by means of the law?" "That is the paradox of it," he countered. "We do get justice." "You are speaking professionally now, are you not?" I asked. Colonel Ingram blushed, actually blushed, and again he looked anxiously about him for a way of escape. But I blocked his path and did not offer to move. "Tell me," I said, "when one surrenders his personal feelings to his professional feelings, may not the action be defined as a sort of spiritual mayhem?" I did not get an answer. Colonel Ingram had ingloriously bolted, overturning a palm in his flight. Next, I tried the newspapers. I wrote a quiet, restrained, dispassionate account of Jackson's case. I made no charges against the men with whom I had talked, nor for that matter did I even mention them. I gave the actual facts of the case, the long years Jackson had worked in the mills, his effort to save the machinery from damage and the consequent accident, and his own present wretched and starving condition. The 3 local newspapers rejected my communication, likewise did the 2 weeklies. I got hold of Percy Layton. He was a graduate of the university, had gone in for journalism, and was then serving his apprenticeship as reporter on the most influential of the 3 newspapers. He smiled when I asked him the reason the newspapers suppressed all mention of Jackson or his case. "Editorial policy," he said. "We have nothing to do with that. It's up to the editors." "But why is it policy?" I asked. "We're all solid with the corporations. If you paid advertising rates, you couldn't get any such matter into the papers. A man who tried to smuggle it in would lose his job. You couldn't get it in if you paid 10 times the regular advertising rates." "How about your own policy?" I questioned. "It would seem your function is to twist truth at the command of your employers, who, in turn, obey the behests of the corporations." "I haven't anything to do with that." He looked uncomfortable for the moment, and then brightened as he saw his way out. "I, myself, do not write untruthful things. I keep square all right with my own conscience. Of course, there's lots that's repugnant in the course of the day's work, but then you see that's all part of the day's work." He wound up boyishly. "Yet you expect to sit at an editor's desk some day and conduct a policy?" "I'll be case-hardened by that time," was his reply. "Since you are not yet case-hardened, tell me what you think right now about the general editorial policy." "I don't think," he answered quickly. "One can't kick over the ropes if he's going to succeed in journalism. I've learned that much at any rate." And he nodded his young head sagely. "But the right?" I persisted. "Oh, you don't understand the game. Of course it's all right, because it comes out all right, don't you see?" "Delightfully vague," I murmured. But my heart was aching for the youth of him. I felt that I must either scream or burst into tears. I was beginning to see through the appearances of the society in which I had always lived, and to find the frightful realities that were beneath. There seemed a tacit conspiracy against Jackson, and I was aware of a thrill of sympathy for the whining lawyer who had ingloriously fought his case. But this tacit conspiracy grew large. Not alone was it aimed against Jackson. It was aimed against every working man who was maimed in the mills. And if against every man in the mills, why not against every man in all the other factories and mills? In fact, was it not true of all the industries? And if this was so, then society was a lie. I shrank back from my own conclusions. It was too terrible and awful to be true. But there was Jackson, and Jackson's arm, and the blood that stained my gown and dripped from my own roof beams. And there were many Jacksons, hundreds of them in the mills alone, as Jackson himself had said. Jackson I could not escape. I saw Mr. Wickson and Mr. Pertonwaithe, the 2 men who held most of the stock in the Sierra Mills. But I could not shake them as I had shaken the mechanics in their employ. I discovered that they had an ethic